Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by Deborah Weinswig, who is the founder and the CEO of Coresight Research, and a good friend. So you're kind of a better combination than that, can you, Deborah?
Definitely not. Thank you so much for inviting me, David.
Deborah, listen, you are an expert on retail, you're an expert on China. From a macro sort of perspective, what do you think retail in China can teach us at the moment?
Good question. I mean, I think that, first of all, it's the fun of it, right? Where you never know quite what is going to happen from day to day. And I think this is why you have such a large percentage of, kind of mobile users who continue to engage more and more every day. And so not only is it the duration, but it's also the frequency because, right, they'll go onto these different apps and, right, they may be entered in a lucky draw. They will find kind of new product and it will be very tailored to their taste. And then what we've also seen, which I have to say I didn't predict in any way, shape, or form, was this big move to offline retail. And once again, how that kind of fun continues. And so, kind of being in the malls there recently, right, we saw a lot around live streaming and just even this idea that the store came to life. And it wasn't the same kind of, expectation. And so I think if I were to kind of pull it all together, number one is like the fun aspect. Number two, it is, right, retailers and brands working closely together to deliver really an experience to the consumer that, is forever changing, which I think drives more engagement. And then number three, if we think around kind of product development, this idea that you're really continuing to develop more product that's local for the market, which once again drives greater engagement.
Now, you mentioned the word fun. It just makes me think that maybe Western retailing, we've sort of lost the concept of actually retail is fun. We've been so sort of concerned on efficiencies, supply chains, and of course, clearly during the pandemic period, people have been shopping in as opposed to shopping out. But the whole concept of bringing fun back into the shopping experience is something that we sort of lose at our peril.
I think that, when the focus was more on the mall and the stores and like the experience, right? The malls had, ice skating rinks, which many of those have been taken out. And there was this move towards, concerts and other things to kind of bring the individual malls to life. And so number one, I think that the malls have really just become, efficiency and, maybe showcasing new products, but not even that as much. Number two, it's really, I feel that Amazon has really made everything just about price, right? It's not even product attributes as much outside of tech, right? It's really just price driven.
Or maybe also about functionality in a sense, quick instant delivery. They're very good operators of what they do. You have certainty, I suppose.
Well, actually, it's really interesting you bring that up because I think that the West has learned from the East with like Meituan and Alma. I mean, we're seeing a lot of the focus now, right? There's actually a whole instant needs kind of segment that's like popped up in the US where you can get pretty much anything in 15 minutes or less. And ironically, one of the last cities they came to was New York, right? Where you do have the density. So it's been proven and fairly, I would say, not that population dense markets, but there is this movement towards, kind of really quick commerce. And I think that's, maybe our innovation here in the West, once again, I think we're borrowing from the East, but is around kind of efficiency, logistics, everything that you mentioned, as opposed to product innovation.
Talk about innovation. Why is it? Maybe you wouldn't agree with the premise, but if the premise is that a lot of retail innovation is coming out of China now, what is it about the China market that is spawning all this innovation?
I think that it's this, first of all, I do think it will be the largest retail market very soon. If it's not 22, then 23. So this growing demand, I think, for a very high quality product, consumers are willing to pay for it, and the engagement. So if we take a step back, for the average Chinese consumer to convert, it's 12 touch points. This is a very educated consumer, all the way from like tier 1 to tier 5 cities. Here in the West, it's only 4 touch points. So you have a consumer, first of all, there's less ways to engage with other consumers. But in some ways, I feel like there's maybe just like less interest, and it goes back to like the functionality. And, I mean, if you take yourself back, David, right, to some of the questions and, kind of conversations you and I had, right, like sitting across the table from each other in China, right, it was all about, right, the excitement around new product development, right, what was, kind of happening as it related to the fashion side of things. And even on the food side, right, I feel like fashion was brought to food and a lot around product development. I don't think we have as much of that kind of interest or engagement. And I think that what we see in China is a very demanding consumer. And when you're demanding and you have the kind of wallet to back it up, I think you get great product at a great price, but I think you get a lot more innovation too.
Now, coming to 11/11, I mean, we've been both in China together during 11/11 periods. Hopefully we can do it again next year. What is it? And we've experienced the thrills, the excitement across its various different dimensions. But what is it in terms of the elements of 11/11 that you think the component parts that make it so successful? And then whilst you're thinking about that, the subsidiary question, which I'll get in first, is what bits do you think are replicable outside of China?
So maybe I'll start with what I don't think is replicable, which is, right, we've seen a lot of even Western brands who would never pair up in the US, who work very closely together in China, right? You buy on one site, you get entered into a lucky draw on another. And that, I think that collaboration, both online and offline, I think is really important, which we don't necessarily see, or we just don't see in the West. That's number one. Number two, the amount of effort that's put into, not only from a marketing perspective, right? It's like you're bringing shopping to life. I mean, you really are. And that's kind of not, outside of live streaming, which is a whole different kind of focus. But this idea that, it's kind of very real and very exciting. And a lot of it is also purpose-based. Number three, this idea that there's a date that we develop new product for, right? And product that we can, right? We have this great opportunity to test, I think is really exciting. And then lastly, I mean, Dave, we could spend the entire time talking about live streaming, but I do think that, the last time I was on, kind of Alibaba's campus, right? I would, like, my breath was taken away by what we were seeing and just the amount of live streaming and, and the conversion. And what I think is so important, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later in our conversation, is if the consumer has, first of all, they're engaging, right? They're asking questions, they're getting real-time answers. But when we think about this idea of a green 11/11, which I think we're seeing much more so this year, that live streaming in itself is green because we see a much lower return rate because the consumer can get their questions answered in real time and make better decisions at the moment.
We will come back to that. You raised a number of important points, which we will come back to. But before we do, again, from a sort of a macro perspective, shopping festivals have clearly gained a lot of consumer acceptance in China. There are a lot of them these days. In fact, sometimes it's difficult to work out when there isn't a festival of some form or other going on. But do you think the concept of shopping festivals, which I think is very different to, Black Friday or Cyber Monday, do you think that proposition can travel?
I mean, yes, I think so. We ourselves, we're in our second year of our 10/10 shopping festival, which really developed last year around the challenges with supply chain for holiday, right? There was a real reason, and we were trying to pull the shopping season earlier. Last year was quite simple. We really just asked every retailer that participated for like a URL and their logo, and we directed people towards their website. We saw an average of 25% increase in conversion over, kind of the 4-day, weekend around Columbus Day, which is why we picked 10/10. This year, because of challenges with the Delta variant, we really made it live stream only. So not only out of the 35 or so participants, did about 30 of them had never live streamed before. So that was a challenge and an opportunity unto itself. But we did see this idea around, I think the consumers with this idea, I think that it was very hard for the retailers, the brands, and the consumers to understand that these prices were only available for a a specific time because we really haven't, right? With Black Friday, right? It's like, it's now Black Friday week. It's not one day. And so I think that we've got to train the consumer, where I think in China, right, they're very, like you said, they're very used to this idea of ramping up, getting excited, doing their research, putting the items in the cart ahead of time. And so I think that it's going to take, I do feel it's like 2 to 3 more years here in the West before there's this understanding around what is a shopping festival, what does it mean, why is it important? And, I mean, it's still very early here, but there's a lot to learn from the East.
Now, focusing a little bit of attention on live streaming, you've mentioned it a couple of times. Again, looking at, through your expert retail lens, do you see live streaming becoming a major sales channel across the world?
I mean, my personal belief is that you've got stores, you have e-commerce, right? And, live streaming is kind of bridging the two in a way, right? We see now a lot of retailers who are live streaming from the store. During the pandemic, I think that I don't know if we hadn't had, the pandemic, if we would have seen the degree of interest that we've seen in the West. It's still...
Well, certainly I'd imagine the adoption would have been significantly slower.
And it's been slow. I mean, I will tell you, 100% of the time, retailers are like, do you think this is something real? What do you think's driving this? Do you think this? Do you think that? So there's a lot of questions, which we're more than happy to answer. But, the technology here in the West is still very clunky, right? So you'll be on a stream, you'll put something in your cart, right? It's in the e-commerce side of the retailer. Then you go to the e-commerce side and, I would say at least half the time the item is like falling out of your cart. And then going to the website to try and find the item. It is, right, payment, just the journey. But we'll get there. And I guess the great thing in the West right now is there's a significant amount of capital pouring into all these live streaming platforms because there is this kind of race to be the dominant platform. It's still very early, and I think we have a lot to learn. But ultimately, going back to my original kind of, thought process around this, we're trying to green retail. To me, this is the easiest, simplest, and cheapest way to do so. I mean, this is your highest ROI channel because you literally, right, you need a phone, you need a ring light, and you need a sales associate somewhere, preferably in the store or mall, because then they have access to kind of a greater amount of product. But I think we're still very early in the West. We're estimating all of North America at about $15 billion this year, and for the US, it's just 11. Our estimate for China alone is $300 billion. And I think with what we've already seen with Double 11 this year, our estimate might be low, but there's a path forward. We're just we're in the, we're not even like walking. Maybe we're sitting up. We're not even crawling yet. But we're getting there.
Now, one of the things that has driven a lot of live streaming in China is it being done by some of the KOLs, the key opinion leaders. And there are, maybe 2 or 3 that are really at the top that are generating sort of billions in revenue. Do you see the equivalent outside of China as being, celebrities doing live streaming? I mean, can you see some of our sports stars, our TV stars, our social media stars creating and developing very large-scale live streaming businesses?
I mean, it was really funny. Last year, we worked closely with Alibaba on this like pitch fest, and one of the brands, which was Uncle Bud's, worked with, kind of Magic Johnson. And I have to say, right, like it takes a lot to humor me. David, you have a great sense of humor. You often humor me, but Magic was like, I never knew about live streaming. He's like, this is amazing, right? And so I think that there was this genuineness and this authenticity about him. I do think that went a very long way with consumers. We're not seeing right now the celebrity-driven aspect of this. I think what's actually very interesting is that we are professionalizing, right, the sales associate. And we're giving them almost like a path forward from a, kind of professional, kind of opportunity perspective. And to me, that's quite exciting. We have some retailers who are literally paying their sales associates in like days off and gift cards. So once again, going back to this is a very, kind of high ROI, low cost way for them to do business. And, a lot of kind of ex-QVC HSN hosts are where we're still seeing the greatest, return in terms of selling, because selling and being a celebrity are really two very different things. And this whole idea around KOLs, once again, we had tried it for our Double 10 shopping festival. It was really hard to get the brands right. So they're like, we're going to ship product, and somebody besides someone who works for us or is a spokesperson for us is going to talk about our product. They're like, not ready just yet. So I do think for now it'll have a different, kind of a different person who's doing the stream. And we've actually seen, it's really interesting, a lot of CEOs who are really interested in once again, they'll have a co-host. But I think it goes back to that authenticity.
Well, if you really want to get close to your consumers, there's nothing closer than live streaming directly to them.
Exactly.
Because it is that two-way traffic. I think the thing that people don't quite understand about live streaming, it's not like QVC. You have your dialogue, you have your script, you start and you finish. It's an interaction. People are interacting back. You have to answer their questions. It's a very different format. Deborah, in the last few minutes that we've got, what should we all be looking out for this year's 11/11 as signs that things are good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, number one, it's really interesting. A lot of the brands and retailers we've worked with and have talked to, they're, focusing more on, kind of gift with purchase, right? This idea around sampling and whatnot. And it's not kind of this race to the bottom on price. That I found to be very interesting. And some of it could be supply chain driven, but I feel like there's something more. It goes back to, I think, this like greening of, kind of Double 11. Number two, much of what we're seeing in the West, interestingly, is what we're seeing in China, where more of the brands are kind of trying to get their message across, almost an education, right? Who are we? What do we stand for? Why do you want to kind of be in our ecosystem? And then lastly, this idea around, kind of recycling, what do you do with packaging? And, we saw this at CES earlier this year around, some of the packaging, and we're starting to see more and more of that as it relates to Double 11. And I feel this kind of more almost purpose-driven kind of move towards shopping. So I think we're going to see, the greatest kind of sales opportunity. We've already, kind of heard some very positive results from retailers we talked to. But I think that there is a noticeable change and shift towards what's happening this Double 11. And I think, it's, really retail is based now in China. I think that that's a very positive message for the rest of the world, where it's not just about price, right? It's about product attributes. And there needs to be this kind of higher purpose and greening of shopping. And once again, we've learned it first at Double 11.
Well, Deborah, thank you very much indeed. We'll be having another conversation next week where we'll be looking at the first week of 11/11 activity and getting our collective insights about what that means for us. But for today, the first day of 11/11, Deborah Weinswig, the founder and CEO of Coresight Research, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, David. Take care. Talk to you soon.